The Smiling Human podcast is made possible by listeners like you. If you would like to experience more of these shows into the future, then please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Hello, and welcome to The Smiling Human, where collectively we evolve through inquiry. Hello, everyone. My name is Oak Mountain, and I'm your host. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Kiki Grace. Kiki is a dedicated somatic embodiment coach and psychedelic guide, recognized for her expertise in helping individuals reclaim their authentic selves. With a foundation in yogic philosophy, teaching, and transformational coaching, alongside 15 years of mentored psychedelic work, Kiki has guided hundreds through challenges such as depression, anxiety, and addiction. Her 12-session coaching program incorporates somatic practices rooted in Hakomi and somatic experiencing, and offers clients a structured path to emotional attunement and nervous system regulation. Through Kiki's leadership, clients are empowered to step into a more aligned, purposeful, and self-expressed life. She and I dive into the deep listening that opens up this kind of wisdom that comes through the body, as well as how we might approach our own relationship to self and expression based on the wisdom we find. I hope you enjoy. Fantastic. Well, Kiki, it's fantastic to have you here. It's been a long time coming. I know we've had beautiful conversations and nearly a decade worth of friendship to look back on. And so thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be on The Smiling Human.
Yeah. Well, and on that note, I'll ask you the question that I ask every guest. What's the last thing that made you smile?
The honest, truthful answer right now is the tech difficulties that we had getting into this. And then right when you hit play, having my earbud fall out. So just in smile. Before all that happened today, the answer I was going to say was actually just a really nice relational morning with my partner made me smile this morning. So that was going to be my answer before all the other things.
Before calamity struck. Yeah. I hope our listeners can appreciate we have started half an hour late due to a series of technical difficulties. So we've been hard at work to get this lovely conversation to you. Now, obviously, as mentioned, we've been friends for nearly 10 years. So I know what you do. I know what makes you tick in terms of your vision and your purpose, but this might be the first time that people are coming into contact with your name, with your work. And so I would love for you to share with the audience more about what you're doing at present and maybe a little bit about how you came to do the work that you're doing.
Great. Thank you. The work I am doing at present, I would say is, and kind of has been for a long time in different iterations, but is around, the easiest way to say it is helping people fully step into their own somatic experience, their own embodied experience, and be exactly who they are in the world, not all of the facets and conditioning and trauma patterns and everything that takes them out of being themselves. So the last 10 years for sure, most of my life has just become dedicated, most of my adult life, I should say, has been dedicated for me to figure out what that has meant for me, and then how to help other people do that. And so there's a few streams in which I do that work. The predominant one is just in a coaching container with people where I bring a decade worth of yogic training and yogic body-based training, but also philosophy, pranayama, breath work, the whole gamut of yogic training. That was the first decade of adult learning. And then a transformational recovery coaching model paired with a psychedelic integration model. So that is my coaching background model. And then I couple that with a modality called Hakomi. So I've done a bunch of workshops in Hakomi, and there's a certain language that Hakomi presents and offers people to attune to and become mindful and curious about the responses of the soma, the body, how the body is speaking to us, which yoga does as well, but in a different way. And then 15 plus years of working with psychedelic medicine. So those are kind of the coupling that has brought me into this. And so I work in that realm. So I coach with people. I help people learn how to work with psychedelics either on their own or with me. If they want a full guided journey, I facilitate that for them as well. And then my partner and I have stepped into agreement coaching and consent-based coaching as well, and what it means to form a healthy, vibrant relationship. And we also do couples coaching with or without psychedelics, solo and together, as a duo. So that's kind of the full gambit of the work that I do in the world. Yeah.
Beautiful. Definitely a broad spectrum for weaving. And if I might add, I think all of them are woven or at least strung together with a very clear intention of service. And I think that that's what amplifies the capacity for these different modalities to be so effective. And I can say that having received your coaching and your support in the past as well. And, you know, I feel as though I turn to you on occasion for counsel. So I know of your capacity and your strength in those areas. So I can speak to that for anybody curious. What seems particularly interesting for me, and we've got a few different areas to branch into based on our pre-recording conversation, but right out the gate, the balance between the somatic integration, the somatic embodiment work, and the psychedelic, for some, at least I would say in my past, I might imagine those to actually be disparate avenues of exploration. Particularly if we look at the word psychedelic, it's mind expanding or mind opening in a sense, right? What I want to emphasize to listeners who might be of that same disposition is that the word psyche actually translates more clearly to spirit, that the psyche was that which gives sentience and sapience. It is that which is divinely created and imbues consciousness into a body. And so when we think about something that's psychedelic, it's actually awakening that more pure, that more central or core aspect of our experience, such that we might call consciousness. And why I find that so powerful for the bridge between somatics and psychedelic work is that, well, particularly I'm reminded of a quote from Stephen Harold Buhner. It's that, see if I can get this right, it might be a paraphrase, that our mind is not just embrained, but it's embodied. That is to say, the entirety of our form, which would constitute the somatic realm, is a thinking, feeling, sensing, and perceiving expression of nature. And so I wonder for you, how is it that you see those two realms connecting? That sort of alternative states of consciousness, this capacity for body-based awakening and somatic integration?
It's a great question. One of the first things I'm struck by when you say the brain, however you said that, is like embodied, is like the brain is one aspect of the central nervous system, but the central nervous system runs through the entire body down to the spinal cord. And then there's nerves that innervate down to our feet, down to our toes. And every aspect of our body is taking in thousands of signals all the time. And our brain has gated what signals it determines to be relevant or not based on our life experience, our conditioning, and everything. So we don't feel the clothes on our skin regularly all the time, or else that would be sensory overload. And so it has learned to gate that sensory input, so that we're only aware of certain things. So that's one way. And so in that regard, there's always a conversation happening between our brain and the nerves. And it's a two-way conversation, but it comes usually from the sensory up to the brain first, and then the brain gates it, and then we become aware of it. So one of the ways in which psychedelics shift that is it opens up the pathways in the brain of what gating is possible. So it's so interesting that you just spoke about Stephen Harold Buhner. He has a book, it might be right there. I think it's over there, Plant Intelligence in the Imaginal Realm. I think it's beyond the camera. Amazing book. The first few chapters explain this in greater detail than I'll ever be able to. I'm not a scientist. I understand science decently, but I'm not a scientist. If people want to understand the science of it, go read that book. But it opens up the capacity for us to renegotiate and shift what gating is happening. Therefore, we can also shift our own relationship to our body, to our soma, to what senses are being heightened, negated, what we are paying attention to, what we're not paying attention to, and all that. So in that regard, psychedelics open up our capacity to understand our own sensory experience in a different way. So just from that level, I think it works there. The other thing that psychedelics do, so this is like kind of twofold in your question, because like the part of it with it being like mind manifesting, and there can be these experiences that actually almost take us out of body with psychedelics, particularly at way higher doses and all this thing where we actually kind of disconnect from our body and we can go on this wild experience and trip that like is very disembodied. In order for that to have any relevance in this world, we have to pull it back down in through our body, in through our being, in through the lived experience of this realm, and know how to interface it with the reality that I make dinner later and I talk to my friends later and I have to go to a job. And like, if it's just this experience that you go on and you have this cool experience and then you forget about it and there's no change or nothing in how it affects this realm, for me, and this is just me, other people think like, cool, you can do that. I don't see the point. Personally, that's not of interest to me. What's of interest to me is how that informs the way in which I relate to the world in this embodied way. And as you said before, with the psyche truly translating more towards like spirit, we are an embodiment of the spirit of who I am, or spirit itself, and that gets into a different conversation. But we have a body intentionally. We are meant to be an embodied being here on earth. And so if we're not working with practices or working with psychedelics or working with anything that we do in a way that taps us more deeply into our body, again, for me, it's like, what's the point? This is what we're here to do and experience and be. And when we're not doing that, we're missing so much of what like is possible through these. So that's the other way that I actually think the two connect. And then the last thing I'll say is, and then certain psychedelics, and particularly at dose ranges. So often psychedelics at really high dose ranges is when you start to get the more disembodied experiences, not always, but often. At mid range and especially low range, there are ways that it actually helps just slightly amplify the sensory experience happening in the body, thus that we can become more connected and aware of it. Like I was talking about before, it shifts the gating that's happening, so that we can get more in tune, more deeply connected to what is happening in our body in a way that we've maybe pushed down or disconnected from or ignored for years. And I think that amplification, and again, it's often dose dependent, container dependent, all these other things. That's where, for me, the real magic of psychedelics is.
There's some powerful points that weave a greater picture here, and I'll do my best to reflect it back for you and for the audience while progressing this conversation. The concept of perception gating is one that I encountered first when I read the book Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley. And the idea that we have a faucet in our mind that is set to a slow drip. And if we are to open that up, we get a stronger flow of sense data coming into the decoding center that is the brain. And when you're speaking to the difference, not the difference, but the lack of detectability of our clothing, the first thing that came to my mind, and I'll weave this back into the psychedelics and the purpose and all these other pieces, is neurodivergence, particularly the neurological characteristics of autism, and how autism in many, because it is a spectrum, the capacity to gate out non-relevant sense data is inhibited. And so clothing tags, twisted socks, sticky fingers, buzzing electrical sockets, whatever it is, it's something that can't actually be filtered out by the nervous system. And so on one hand, this gating, when it is not active as a default, can actually be quite a hindrance, annoying, to be frank. But on the other end, I wonder, well, and let me say this before I move to that point. The annoyance part or the hindrance is because the sense data that is coming in is not applicable or actionable. Mm-hmm. It's not actually informing us of how we might reach a greater truth, connect with some value, accomplish some meaningful goal. And that mirrors for me what you spoke to in terms of taking these wildly high doses of psychedelics, blowing out of the body, meeting the DMT elves and coming back and having nothing to do with it, right? And mm-hmm. not being able to do anything with it. The lack of actionability and the lack of applicability is really a core piece of any evaluation of data or experience. And experience is data in some sense. Okay. From here, what I notice as maybe the mirror side or the inverse of this inability to gate irrelevant sense information, such as the neurodivergent neurology, is the propensity of our systems to close the gates mm-hmm. to things that maybe we ought to or would benefit from experiencing. And this tunes me into things like repression, suppression, trauma memories, things that are stored in the body that actually hold themselves in the nervous system and get numbed because mm-hmm. of maybe an incapacity to address, integrate, feel safely in that sense. And I know that we talked in our pre-recording conversation about healing, and I think this might be a nice bridge to that idea around these gates of perception to trauma and what necessitates those openings and the integration of those pieces. A bit of a broad pitch, but I'll pass it back.
I just want to clarify mm-hmm. where we ended in that. So the question proposition in this moment is just like, how do we reopen gates that have been closed? Is that kind of fundamentally what you're getting at? Or how do we move towards healing and ungating that which has been gated for our own benefit to move towards healing?
Yes.
Okay, great. Great. So the first, okay. Lots of things have to take place, I think. One of the first things someone has to do is recognize that something is not right, which I think that right, I don't actually like the word right, that something is not harmonious in their system anymore, and that there ought to be a movement towards something more harmonious, more at ease, more regulated in their nervous system. Those may not be words that they have. Often they feel anxious. Often they feel depressed. There's these kind of overarching words that we use for the experiences that ultimately those, in my opinion, are masks of the deeper layers of whatever it is that they need. And then what is required for someone to move towards healing? So in this regard, it's the idea of what creates a healing container for somebody, what creates the parameters in which they can step into, allow themselves to feel and experience all that they have been pushing down. I have a lot of clients who, when we start working, they'll say that. I'll say, oh, what just happened? They're like, oh, I don't know. I just pushed it back down. And it's literally their instinct, even before we can touch on it, is, oh, I don't know, I swallowed and I pushed it back down. And there's sometimes honestly this, and it's we just push it back into this realm of abyss that they don't even know what's all there. They just push it down. So one of the first is not maybe the right word, but One of the ways in which, if I'm working one-on-one, so healing containers can take many forms. There's one-on-one work, there's kind of circle work, there's retreat work, and that can be one-on-one, two-on-one, or maybe in a group setting. And then there's like solo work that we do with ourselves. That is also part of the healing process. So let me start in like if in a one-on-one kind of coaching, therapeutic, even with a friend, you can have really cool healing experiences one-on-one with a friend. But as a practitioner, a one-on-one healing container to me needs to have a set of really clear agreements. So what is it that you are coming to me for? What is it that I can provide for you? In that, what is that going to look like, so that you have expectation of what we're doing here? How long do we think this might take? That one's a really hard one to answer, but still setting out some form of expectation. That's one of the first things, is like creating really clear agreements. And now often in therapy, it's called informed consent, and you get this thing of like, you are buying into somatic experiencing practitioner, or da, 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 and then and it has like a bit of explanation. Sign here to say, yes, you understand what you're doing. I think that kind of basic way that we have set as a premise is decent. But I think it lacks a deeper understanding of what the role is of the individual coming into the space that they need to bring of themselves. So it's not just this like, you're the expert, you're going to heal me. It's that I am coming into this, what is expected of me in this container, and what am I expecting of the other, so that we can form a relationship that will foster healing. So agreements that I have, and I don't know how many I have, but they have to sign and initial every single one that if they read them, I don't know, but I hope that they do. But it states like, I expect them to bring material forward. I'm not the one going digging and finding it. There are ways in which we can dig up and find the material, but they have to come forward with something that they want to talk about, or that they are taking responsibility for in their own life. They have to understand that while there's a container, the only way any of this will work is if there is action taken on their part in their life outside of therapy, outside of a coaching container, that they actively impose some changes. Because just thinking I'm going to understand it and therefore a change will happen is not like, that's not going to happen. And so I have a whole set of agreements that the clients buy into, and we negotiate and we discuss. One of those agreements is also, I'm going to interrupt you. I'm going to stop your process numerous times, so that you're not just in a rant or in a typical experience that you have. We're going to stop, and we're going to tune in to a moment, and a specific moment. So based in Hakomi and somatic experiencing type teachings, that's the main somatic lens that I work in. We tune into a very precise moment of, sometimes it's activation, sometimes it's just a felt sense, sometimes it's when people say I'm anxious, one of the first questions is, how do you know that? How do you know that you're anxious? Well, I've said that I'm anxious. I've been telling myself that this thing that I'm feeling is anxious. Okay, cool. What's the thing that you're feeling? What are the actual sensations? What's the story? What is going on in the being that then says this equals anxiety? And that process can take a really long time for some people to actually even unravel this thing we have labeled X. What does that actually mean physically, somatically in the body? But again, it comes back to, we have an agreement that I am going to interrupt you. And that is negotiated with the client. Another thing is that I get them, every single thing that I bring to them is an invitation. It's not a direction. It's not a command. It's not, you have to do this. It's, would it be okay if we did this? So that their nervous system, their being, gets to say yes and or no. And part of this discovery is also helping people learn that they can say no, because that's one of the some of the other work I do with my partner in consent work and all this stuff, is our inability to say no to a lot of things in life, or to say not yet, or I need more information, or whatever it is, or I'm uncomfortable, we default towards yes, people pleasing. I want to show up. I would in all these ways that actually hurts us. So some of it, at least in the healing container I have, and in other somatic work, it's getting the individual to actually say, I don't want to go there right now. Great. Let's honor that there's something in you that is saying no. And when they get that honored and a no honored, that can become its whole own process as well. So there's all these agreements and understandings and kind of pushback that I have with clients to allow them to have little tiny processes and little tiny understandings, micro understandings in the space over 75 minutes or so. But one of the other parts that is really crucial to all of this happening, and this builds up over time, is knowing what it means for them to feel safe enough in the container with me, safe enough in their body to access some of this stuff. So ultimate safety is in some ways an illusion, because life is life, but it's what does safe enough for this moment look like? Do you feel safe enough? One of the first questions I ask clients when they come in or in a call with me is, so they're sitting, they're comfortable, they're whatever. And this isn't necessarily safety, but I'll explain it in a second. One of the first questions I usually say is there anything you could offer yourself right now to help you be 10% more comfortable? Just 10% more comfortable. And it's fascinating how often there is something. Yeah, I could just slouch a little bit more. Cool. Why don't you try that? How do you know that you're more comfortable having done that? And we might have 10, 15 minutes. Sometimes for some people, I'll ask it again. Is there something else you could do to make yourself 10% comfier? Because they're not used to even prioritizing in a session with me their own need, their own safety, their own comfort. So starting there from a place of like, what does it mean for you to actually be, there's probably tension, there's anxiety, there's all these things that you're feeling as well, but within that experience, some level of comfort so that they can drop into themselves and allow themselves to meet me from that place, 10% softer, 10% comfier. So again, it's finding what feels safe enough for them to be able to do the work. And that can change. That can change session to session. That can change over time. As the relationship builds, often people feel more safe with me naturally. It's a building of trust between practitioner and person. And then the other piece that I think is really important is being very clear on what is welcome in this container and what is not. And this is one thing I don't think all practitioners do very well. I'm a practitioner, and again, I speak to this in my discovery call with people. You can talk to me about your sex life. You can talk to me about your shame. You can talk to me about addiction. There's nothing that you will bring into this experience with me that I will ever judge or that I will ever shame you for experiencing. I name that. Now, naming it doesn't mean that the person buys in and believes it right away. That gets reinforced all the time in sessions. But there are practitioners, there's therapists who don't actually want to talk about certain things. They want to be a therapist, and there's a disconnect for them, and maybe there's their own taboos, their own boundaries, their own things. And I'm not judging that. There's nothing wrong with that. But I believe it would be good in the container with your clients for that to be explicit. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's a piece that I don't think is welcomed very well. That I think is very crucial.
Something that is an impediment to this kind of healing work. That if we meet relationships that mirror an unwillingness to be with those very same things that cause us discomfort and contraction, then it is a feedback loop. Well, it's not welcome here, it's not welcome in me. It's not welcome here, it's not welcome in me. Mm-hmm. And that's a really sad place to be, particularly if you are one seeking this kind of support. Because ultimately, I'm reminded of Dr. Blanton, I believe his name is. He wrote a book called Radical Honesty. His thesis is essentially that if you are and were to be completely honest in your life with yourself and all other people, all of your psychological stresses would disappear, because the world gets organized and sorted out in the most harmonious way. Not the sorting being harmonious, but the end result is harmony when we are absolutely unequivocally and utterly honest with ourselves and with other people. I wanted to cycle back to one of the first pieces that you said, because a metaphor came to me when you were talking about the necessity for engagement and participation on the side of the person seeking this kind of healing. And it reminded me of like the difference between tending to something living and tending to something inanimate. It's like, if I treat my body like a vehicle, literally, then I'm going to take it to a mechanic and say, please replace my exhaust manifold. And assuming that they are trustworthy, they will fix the thing that needs to be fixed, and I will drive home with a repaired vehicle. The body is not like this, because the body is a constant re-emergent phenomenon. Truly, all of our very fundamental constituent parts are popping in and out of existence. You know, there's the quantum realm to it, there's the energetic realm to it, there's the growth and death of cells. All of this is a renewal. And as such, when we are expressing or seeking some sort of healing, I put that in quotes because I think there's something to be said about that word particularly, which I will say after this. Our own volition is required. We have to buy in. Willingness to participate and to take action is, in fact, I want to say, the only way that healing happens. We don't get fixed by the outside. We might, okay, sure, you have a viral infection, you can take antibiotics, sure, but those are not the prime mechanism of healing. Your body is working alongside that method. We're always coming back to the primacy of the body. I think this speaks a lot to what you're talking about on the somatic sense. And so tying this back around to the idea of healing, I'm reminded of a minor crisis, I might say. And this is one that I see inside, or have seen inside, what we might call the New Age community across the world. And that's where people are moving exclusively, constantly seeking healing. I need to heal my ancestral wounds. I need to heal entity attachments. I need to heal my karmic stuff. I need to heal my and we're just constantly moving in this state of brokenness. It's like, well, what exactly do we mean by healing? Well, you spoke to it, I think, aptly when you named the first step that's necessary for healing to take place, which is the individual's capacity to recognize that something ain't quite right. And I know you said, oh, maybe right's the not word. Not right, right is not the right word. But in essence, recognizing dissonance or recognizing pain or discomfort or some sort of misalignment, psychologically, emotionally, or physically, indicates to us that something could change. We ought not take the step to say, if dissonance is being experienced, then there is something lacking, something broken, something wrong.
Yeah.
Right? That's the key piece. It's like, okay, because we are a constituent being, we're made up of so many different parts. We are a continually reborn and reemergent form in mind, body, and spirit. There's going to be the necessity for state change. In fact, our state is that of change. Impermanence, anicca, as they say. And so this shift away from seeking healing or becoming healed, or even seeking wholeness, coming back into wholeness. It's like, what's missing now? Really? Like, really, what's missing now? And they say, well, I don't feel happy. It's like, okay, well, when you're asleep, you don't feel happy. Is there something missing then? No, you're perfectly fine while you're sleeping. Great. So it's not happiness that makes you whole. What is it then? And we can follow this line down and down and down and down. And if we had time, we could actually follow it all the way down. But allow me, spoiler alert, our wholeness is already. It is an innate thing. And so one of the pieces that I've equated to healing is the rediscovery or re-entering into the perceptual experience of our own wholeness. And we could call that harmony. We can call that safety. And I'll add one more thing here in response to the many great points that you added. The prerequisites for feeling safe enough. This reminds me of something that was shared by another guest in season 1, Anya Rose. She talked to me about the difference between feeling safe and feeling safely. And I really chewed on that for a bit, feeling safe versus feeling safely. And the more I mulled about this contrast, here's what I discovered. Typically, and you mentioned this, you've laid the foundation for me, so thank you for the setup. This feeling safe is in essence an impossibility because it is treated as a destination. I need to feel safe. I need to get to safety, as if safety is not here or could not be here, or we could not somehow make manifest the preconditions for that thing to take place that we're waiting for safety to be here before partaking in. So treating it as a destination means it's externalized and it becomes something to gain outside of ourselves. Whereas when we look at the sense of feeling safely, which in a sense I think touches on this safe enough, it speaks more to orientation. How am I oriented to my own emotional experience? Am I saying yes? Am I saying no? Am I saying, I don't even want to go there, homie? Why are you asking? All of that can be shifted in the sense that we can learn to meet the difficult feelings that are bubbling up from this somatic experience, from the body. And they may not feel like safety, but we can feel them safely. And I think learning to do that is something that is one of the great benefits of working with practitioners, working with therapists, working with coaches, having support in general, because one, when we're alone, we're already outside of our normal expectancies for safety. We're not meant to be alone. So if you're going through a deep emotional experience and you're by yourself, it becomes that much more difficult to drop in and go, oh yeah, I'll feel this. Because the whole body's going, I'm alone, I might die. Oh, and there's this feeling here telling me I might die. I might really die. Let's not go there. And so this piece around the social aspect alongside the willingness to meet one's own inner being, the living expression of oneself, that's what I took away from what you were saying. It's a very, very potent piece. On the tails of this, we'll take a short break and we'll come back with the second half of the show. I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I wanted to take a brief moment to talk about just how you can help this show grow into the future. Did you know that we have an Instagram, a YouTube, and a Patreon? Probably. But if you're listening on YouTube, like many of you are, I would invite you to subscribe, to like this video if you've enjoyed it, and to leave a comment. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if you have any questions or maybe guests that you want me to interview. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Music or any other podcast platform, then please take this moment to rate the show. All of these actions go a long way to helping the Smiling Human podcast reach more people and grow into the future. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Well, seeing as we are now in the second half of the show, it is time for the section I'm calling Question of the Week. This is where I invite our guests to bring forward an inquiry, a question that is meaningful to them, that they think might be interesting to the audience, or that maybe they want my take on. And so, Kiki, what have you brought for us this week?
So I'm actually going to ask a question that is slightly personal. I will also share my own answer, so my own personal answer, but I think is a good question for people to reflect on in themselves as well. That's in alignment with what we were just talking about. So in terms of the idea of like what parts of ourself are online or maybe offline. My question for you is, what is a part of yourself that you have currently or more actively been looking to integrate or bring more online in your own being in a way that was pushed away or offline or segregated out of your being for a period of time? And then with that question, you could share maybe why it had been segregated out of your being or kind of taken away from your being for a period of time, and what you're doing and why you're not why, because I think all parts of ourselves, we want to invite all parts online, but how you're working with that part to bring it more into your being and online and part of your expression of self.
Delicious. Well, a few things come to mind, but the one that I believe most suits your question would be characterized in the following phrase. I have allowed myself to be more disagreeable as of late. And what I noticed, and I'll expand on this for those who aren't familiar and maybe haven't heard me harp about the Big Five personality assessment ad nauseum in my own life or on this podcast, disagreeableness is one trait. Agreeableness is a trait of the Big Five. And for those who are low in agreeableness, they are more likely to say what they believe to be true, even if it generates conflict. That's the aspect of politeness. And I may not come across as such on this platform, but I am rather low in trait politeness normally. And what I realized is that I had been, up to the point where I took this test, it was actually the test that spurred this forward with me, more likely to stay silent in some cases where I disagreed or didn't feel like something was true for me. Not always, but enough that I noticed it and felt like there was a lack of integrity, a lack of authenticity. And so when I read this assessment, my assessment, and I also at the same time read a book by Susan Campbell, it's actually on the top shelf there, Getting Real, 10 Truth Skills You Need to Live an Authentic Life. Side note, one of two books I believe everyone should read, Getting Real by Susan Campbell. I realized that I was limiting my authenticity for the benefit of others and out of fear. Fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of honestly losing my energy in trying to have my authenticity understood. That's characterized a large part of my life, is that when I have been true and real in my development, this is a story, obviously, that others don't understand, or at worst, misunderstand, and then respond to their misunderstandings in a way that promotes and has promoted a sense of crippling isolation, i.e. no one understands me. And what I realized is that, well, look, if I'm moving through this world holding back what is true, no wonder people are going to misunderstand me, because I'm not offering the highest resolution picture of my inner world. And so I stopped. And instead, I just say what I believe to be true. And this is different than bluntness. I want to be really clear that being disagreeable and being forthright and being authentic is not the same as being blunt. Oftentimes, being blunt lacks tact, it lacks compassion, and it also lacks the capacity to, in my experience, speak accountably. This is to say that I own what I say. When I speak, if I disagree, I say, I notice when you said that, there was a drop in my gut and some contraction in my abdomen, and a sense of fear and sort of angst arose in me. And I noticed that I really don't agree. In fact, I think that that's quite a harmful thing to say. This might be something I would say if there was a disagreement. And the beautiful part about that is there's nothing to debate. The idea we can debate, but my experience, you didn't feel that. Well, I surely did. And frankly, if you ever encounter someone that says you're not feeling that, run the other direction, because you're dealing with someone with an antisocial personality disorder. Not necessarily. I'm being hyperbolic. Forgive me. So that piece, a willingness to say things that are true, but likely uncomfortable for others to hear and uncomfortable for me to say in moments where I would otherwise stay silent. that piece has come more to the surface.
Cool. That sounds like it's been
liberating.
That's a great word for it. Yeah. It's interesting as I reflect on that part. I've been somebody who in lots of ways I didn't struggle with that. I disagreed with people quite easily most of my life. And it's interesting, part of my evolution over the last while, this isn't a current thing I'm working on, but part of my evolution over the last while is learning to, I don't always need to state my opinion. It doesn't matter if I disagree or not. Has actually been learning to be like, oh, okay, I disagree. And it doesn't fucking matter that I disagree. There are times that it does. And I think there are times that sharing our opinion is very fruitful. But learning the discernment of when is the right time to share and when isn't, that was actually a big part of my evolution, maybe five or so years ago. And learning, I used to be a more blunt person. And your description of bluntness, I didn't realize at the time that it lacked compassion, because in my mind it was coming from wanting the person to like know more or whatever it was. But it very much, there's ways of saying things that aren't so harmful. And that was another thing that was an evolution of myself. Thanks for sharing that. That was cool. Yeah, I'm generally always
asking him.
Yeah.
I was going to say, curious about what your answer is. That you've been bringing more into your lived truth.
Yeah. So this is, I don't know why I feel the need to state this as a caveat. I guess just for the people listening, we're all at different stages of development. And so like where my growth edge versus your growth edge, like that's always going to be different and unique. And one, like there's no ladder, there's no higher than, or any way, shape or form. And so this one might actually sound like it's like something that people explored a lot earlier in life. And for me, it just wasn't one, but a part of my being that I am, that frankly I was kind of scared of when I was younger, because it's quite strong in me, is my competitive side. And I would explore it. Like we would play games as a family, or like card games or whatever. And so there would be these places where it did get to kind of show its head from time to time, or in board games or whatever. But it often created conflict, and it often was this thing that just didn't, I would get angry, and like just my excessive kind of competitiveness. My depiction of it when I was younger was that it created more conflict than good. And so there really haven't been too many avenues that have had a place for it to express until this year, when I've done 2 CrossFit competitions in the past couple of weeks, to test myself, to exert myself, to let this part of me come fully online, have its seat at the table, have its expression of what does it mean to push myself to the full edge of my physical capacity in competition with other people who are also pushing themselves to the full edge of its physical capacity. And allowing that to express itself. And there were some shadow elements of it. Like I get my competitive nature comes online. And like judging in CrossFit there's supposed to be standards, and it also requires that the person judging tells the person, no, that wasn't right. And that's a very hard thing for us to do. So even though there's a standard and it maybe wasn't right, it's still up to the individual judge, who is often a volunteer, to say to the person, no, that isn't right. And some judges are going to be more adept at doing that and others aren't. Therefore, judging becomes slightly unfair. And so there's one thing where my judge was extraordinarily strict with me, and the other 2 competitors beside me, like, and it's on video, were not held to the same standards. And it drove me crazy, because I ended up slower because I had to do more reps, because my reps were counted at a higher, a more strict standard, if you will. And it was fascinating to watch myself get so mad about this unfairness, which I know is a quality that matters, and all this stuff. And then there is a whole process to dispute it. And I went through this process and I got a few seconds taken off my time and da 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 da. So there was like benefit to it. But it was so fascinating to just see how furious I would get from just like these little things. And like all it matters. And like at the end of the day, it's a CrossFit competition. The next day it doesn't matter. Like it really doesn't in the grand scheme of things. Um, and so it's been this evolution of how do I allow myself to fully come on board, let myself embrace competition, notice the places where I get really angry and like there's another period where that happened again. And I just like, I go from like 0 to 100 so fast. Like my anger just comes on so fast. And I become this like firecracker. And then I have to like take a step back and remind myself like, what is this for? What am I doing this for? And what is this going to matter tomorrow to be this upset, this fired up about this, whatever? So it's been interesting because there have been other kind of shadow elements that have come about in terms of like my competitiveness with other people in my gym and all these other things, and learning how to allow my competitive self a seat at the table, but again, not overtaking my humble self, not overtaking my measured self, not overtaking all of these other parts of me that need to stay online in order for competition to be safe, in order for me to be able to freely express the competitive self. So for me, that's been my exploration in the last little while. And it's just like, it's been funny to witness because I can be in the observer, particularly a few moments after the anger comes in, and I can be like, wow, I was like that. And then I go and thank the people who received some of the fire that I brought. And they're often really good, but yeah.
How did you move from the place of the lived belief that your competitive nature brings more conflict than good to signing up for the first competition? What was the, obviously, because there's a bridge, right? Obviously the story comes from a deeper part of the past and development and might have shifted slowly over time, but there obviously you weren't doing this, before maybe even a year ago, 2 years ago, right? This is a very recent phenomenon in your life. And so what was that process internally? Because we spoke about the willingness to confront, bringing everybody to the table, all of these different pieces that are required to make meaningful shifts, to remember wholeness. So what was that like for you, coming from that one story into actually signing up?
That's a really good question. One of the belief changes that started all of it, and started me working out in general, and even moving towards CrossFit, because I was a yogi for 10 years, really heavily focused yoga practitioner, strength in that, could do the arm balances, the kind of fun, crazy acrobatic stuff. And it was a certain level of not competition, but expression of the poses that existed there, where I would say slight competition might present itself because someone could do something I couldn't. Therefore, it would push me to want to be able to do it. But because yoga is always, at least the teachers I was working with, was always back in understanding why you're doing what you're doing. I worked at that point to come back to, it's for my own self-awareness and self-mastery and ability to command my body to do what it wants, and this mastery over self component that would kind of pull back or dial back the competitive edge, because that's not what yoga was about. Therefore, if I was moving into that, I was then not practicing yoga because I wasn't actually in what yoga is designed to practice. So while it would rear up there wasn't like an outlet for it. And then I don't know, there was also just this belief of like, this is as strong as I'll ever be, or like working out isn't for me. So there was first a navigation and a changing of the belief that I even had the work ethic and factor inside me to push me towards working out at the level that I needed to be able to compete. So that shifted in turn, honestly, mostly through a relationship change where the new partner I had was like, what do you mean? Of course you can do that. You just need to go try it and you'll love it. And of course you can do it, versus my partner before who was like, yeah, of course you're not going to be that kind of person. So that paradigm shift of just even the external belief factors that were being reflected towards me, that was one shift that definitely shifted my orientation to allow myself to even move towards like weightlifting and this thing where I just before thought, oh, that's not for me. It could be for me. And then moving in towards competing, I watched so I started doing CrossFit because I got kind of, I plateaued on what I knew how to do in the gym. So I needed to learn other things to do in the gym. And my partner was like, why don't we try CrossFit? Because it teaches you all sorts of things. He had done CrossFit years before. So we joined CrossFit together. And he said as we joined, he's like, I honestly think you're really going to like it. And I was like, okay. And the first few weeks you're really sore. So it's really hard. And then I sunk into liking it because it's complex, because there's lots of different movements. I get bored. I wouldn't say I get bored easily, but I like novelty. I'm a human being. I like novelty, especially in the physical realm and the expression of my body. I like novelty. I like dance. I like things that move. That's why yoga was so interesting, is because there's like different patterns that you can make and maneuvers with your body. And so CrossFit does have that. There's tons of different movements. And then we watched the CrossFit Games as a documentary with him and his girls, and we just watched it online one day. And at the end of it, him and I were talking upstairs, and I was just like, I never thought that I would be this way, but I kind of want to compete. Like, I'm curious of what it means to push myself at a higher level. So I'm never going to make it to the CrossFit Games. I'm 35. Like, I'm not, like, that's just not, yeah, that's not like the orientation, but the orientation is, what is the peak of me now when I work really hard? What does it mean for me to put 100% effort into this thing and actually test what I'm capable of? Actually allow myself to test what I'm capable of. A few years ago, my belief was I'm not capable of that at all. And I allowed that to be my story. And then it changed into, wait, what if I actually commit fully? What am I fully capable of at this level, at this training, at the age I am, at yada, 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 yada. And so it took me about 3 or 4 weeks to go to my coach and just ask her. The first question was, if I were to move towards competing, because there's just like local competitions, and there's like probably 4 or 5 times through the year, there's like these places that you can compete/test yourself against. Mostly it's testing yourself against yourself and your own belief of what is capable and how high you can do it. But you do get ranked against other people. So there is also the external factor coming in. And I just said to her, I was like, what level? Because I was showing up regularly, but like if I didn't want to go, I wasn't going. And it was just like, what level of commitment do I need to have if X becomes my goal? And she was very clear. She's like, I was going to the Olympic lifting class on Wednesday nights. That's a very specific technique-based class. And she's like, you need to come to at least 4 CrossFit classes a week and the Olympic lifting class. So 5 times total a week. And I was like, okay, great. So I just started to make that commitment. So I guess it was a negotiation of like the willingness inside myself to work towards being better than I perceived myself to be in the physical realm, in this physical exertion realm. Figuring out what the commitment is I would need to make to myself for that to happen. And then being inspired, I got invited to join a girl in a partner competition. That was the first invitation into competition. And so met with her and joined up in her partner competition, and then eventually joined the solo competition. Because I guess like the biggest change was I actually started to believe I could. At the end of the day, I started to believe I could. I was inspired by my partner and his belief that I could. And that ongoingly feeds me, and he keeps believing that I could do more, which was different than a previous partnership.
There's another piece that
Yeah.
I'm seeing, and I think would be important to note, and you mentioned it early on, is that what I heard you say is that you had asked yourself, why is it that I'm doing this? Why is it that I have the desire and drive to express this kind of competitive edge? And what it shows me, and through the story that you've just shared, and maybe some of the listeners pick these out, is that there's underlying values present in all of what you've said. And
Mm.
that moving from the story of my competitive nature is harmful and only causes conflict, to recognizing that the desire to compete is actually an expression of valuing accomplishment, valuing
Mm.
improvement,
Mm-hmm.
valuing self-discovery,
Mm.
valuing achievement. It's a drive, it's a pushing
Yeah.
forward, and it's innate. And so that was one of the pieces I wanted to add just as we wrap up here, is that when we are looking to make these kind of big shifts and these integration movements, understanding why we want to be that way
Mm-hmm.
is one piece. And also, why is it that these voices maybe that we've neglected or rejected are the way they are? Because I firmly believe that every aspect that comes to the table, whether it's pretty or not, indicates to us something that is meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
And when we can get underneath or behind the voice that's coming up, maybe it's anxiety, depression, fear, judgment, et cetera, we get underneath and we find the thing that's actually valuable, we can use that as a compass, or a North Star rather, to find a new route to bringing that value into our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine in listening and watching you speak about this, that there has been a great deal of value that's come into your life, not just through the beautiful support from your partner, but also how that has shifted your own orientation towards self. I can. I
Mm-hmm.
can, and when I do, I get the experience of novelty. I get the experience of accomplishment. I get self-discovery because I'm seeing what is possible for me to do. And I know that I'm the one that is doing it, and there's a level of satisfaction in that as well. And so I wanted to orient that piece into the hearts and minds of the listeners before we close here. And as such, if you're listening here and you're curious, Kiki, I'd love for you to share
Mm.
how people can get in touch with you if they're curious about the work that you do in your facilitation, your transformational work as well. Just anything else that you'd like to offer as a closing sentiment.
Beautiful. Thank you for that invitation. Firstly, I just want to say, yeah, I would say, just in response to that last thing you said, I've had an orientation to growth as my like primary value and belief as to part of why we're here on earth is to grow and experience and become, um for almost as long as I could remember. Like, I loved learning, I loved understanding things from a young age. Like, that process was really enjoyable for me. I loved school. I was like, so I do think that this has just become another expression of that, which you touched on. So thank you for kind of like concising in that discovery from that question into that. So I really appreciated that. And then in terms of the actual answer to the question you asked, people can find me at my website, somahealing.ca. That's where I talk about most of the coaching work I do, and the psychedelic containers that I hold. The other way, yeah, let's you can cut that out. That's going to be the best way for people to find me is just going to the website. I have a contact form there, and or just they can book a discovery call with me. I offer free discovery calls to anyone who wants to discover if we're the right fit. I think compatibility is a massive piece. Coming back to that, like, do I help foster the right container for you? The answer might be no, and someone else does. Like, that's actually okay. The first person you call may not be the answer for you. And it might be that I am for a period of time and I'm not later. Like, our relational needs shift, who we are shifts, all these things. So yeah, anyone who wants to can book a discovery call with me. I offer them for free. I will always offer them for free. I don't think there's a need to charge for that call for people to get to know me. and to discover if we're the right fit. And that's about it.
Beautiful. All of that information will be, as always, in the show notes and the video description. Kiki, thanks again for your authenticity, your sharing, and the exploration today.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that concludes this episode of the Smiling Human podcast. Thank you so much for listening. But before you go, I have 2 invitations for you. The first invitation is to receive a free gift. I've created a free insight journal. This is a 30-day self-reflection and introspection journal that you can download at no cost in the description below. Go have a look and join the journey. The second invitation I have for you is, if it feels within your means and possible for you, then please head over to patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Becoming a patron will give you access to perks like behind-the-scenes footage and access to live Q&As with me monthly. You also get voting privileges to help pick new guests or to help guide other episode content. Truly, the support of listeners like you, paid or unpaid, goes a long way. So if you could like, share, subscribe, and give a rating on the podcast app, all of that goes a long way. Thank you to each and every one of you who's been on this journey with me. See you again soon.